Quincy Holt savored a rare moment of peace under the warm afternoon sun, reclining on a sturdy inflatable lounger in the middle of his backyard pool. He had purchased the property only a few months prior in a gated neighborhood known as Riverbend Estates, seeking tranquility after years of renting noisy apartments. That day, everything seemed perfect. The water was crystal clear, the sky held only a handful of fluffy clouds, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the tall oaks lining the fence. Eyes closed, Quincy allowed his mind to wander. An open book lay face down on a small patio table, and the faint sound of birdsong brought a sense of harmony that he treasured. It was precisely why he had chosen this house, a private haven with a spacious yard and a pool he could call his own. No crowded public facilities, no jostling strangers, just him and the water. Yet, the serenity shattered when a sharp voice pierced the air. Startled, Quincy opened his eyes to see a woman, later introduced as Beatrice Henderson, standing at the edge of his property, arms folded across her chest. Dressed in khaki shorts and a neatly pressed blouse, she projected an air of rigid authority. Quincy couldn't recall seeing her at the neighborhood association meetings. She was an unfamiliar face, and her expression conveyed instant disapproval. Beatrice stepped forward with a brisk, almost confrontational gait. "Excuse me," she called, her voice carrying over the gentle slosh of the water. "You there, do you realize this is a private community?" Her tone bristled with accusatory energy, catching Quincy off guard. He maneuvered his lounger closer to the pool's edge, squinting at the newcomer. "Yes, ma'am," he replied politely. "I'm aware. I live here, in this house." She regarded him for a moment, as though deciding whether to believe him. "I don't recognize you," she said at last. "People around here are usually careful about who they let use the amenities. Are you a guest? A visitor?" Bemused, Quincy shook his head. "I'm not a visitor. I bought this place earlier in the summer. If you check the neighborhood directory, you'll see my name." He tried for a diplomatic tone, not wanting to escalate things. After all, Riverbend Estates was known for strict regulations, and neighbors often took it upon themselves to enforce unwritten guidelines regarding noise, parking, or use of shared facilities. But the pool behind Quincy's home was part of his private property, not a communal resource. He couldn't fathom why a stranger was questioning his right to enjoy it. Beatrice's gaze drifted over Quincy's lounge chair, the neatly kept landscaping, and the freshly painted fence. She frowned, looking unconvinced. "Well," she said, her voice tinged with skepticism, "I think we need to clarify something. We can't just have random individuals swimming wherever they please. This is Riverbend Estates. We have standards." Confusion and a hint of annoyance flickered through Quincy's mind. He'd expected a friendly introduction, maybe a neighborly wave or a polite chat about the community's guidelines. Instead, he was met with suspicion. Sensing the peaceful afternoon slip away, Quincy drew a measured breath, prepared to stand his ground if necessary. Faced with Beatrice Henderson's unwavering stare, Quincy Holt set aside any hope that she'd simply move on. She carried herself with the authority of someone convinced they ran the entire neighborhood. Still seated in the pool, he decided to respond calmly, hoping logic and politeness would diffuse her hostility. Clearing his throat, he reiterated, "As I said, my name's Quincy, and this is my property. I moved in just a few months ago. You can check the homeowner records if you need confirmation." Beatrice folded her arms even tighter. "That's not necessary right now. What I do know is that I've never seen you at any of our community gatherings. People don't just appear in Riverbend Estates without reason." Quincy felt a flicker of frustration. He'd missed the recent homeowner events due to a hectic work schedule, but that shouldn't invalidate his ownership. "I've been busy settling in," he explained, trying to keep his tone measured. "Work commitments kept me from attending the monthly meet and greet. Trust me, I'm looking forward to participating when I can." Beatrice huffed, unmoved. "Well, you haven't, and that makes me question whether you belong here. This community is strict about who uses our amenities and how they're used. We can't let random people wander in and help themselves. Quincy frowned. This isn't a shared amenity, though. The pool is part of my backyard. I'm not trespassing on communal property. This is literally my home. To his surprise, she jabbed a thumb over her shoulder, and a teenage boy stepped forward. Logan, she announced as her son. Next to him stood a man wearing a uniform, introduced as Officer Bradley. The officer, with an official-looking badge pinned to his chest, observed Quincy with a neutral expression. Quincy's stomach sank. Why would Beatrice bring an officer to what was, so far, nothing more than a neighborly disagreement? Officer Bradley is here to assist, Beatrice declared, her gaze flicking from Quincy to the officer. We can't allow outsiders to exploit our neighborhood's resources. If you're not a resident, you need to leave immediately. At her words, Logan nodded, though his eyes darted around with uncertain energy. He seemed uncomfortable, perhaps unaccustomed to his mother's forceful approach. The presence of a uniformed officer, however, signaled that Beatrice wasn't just voicing an opinion, she intended to enforce it. Officer Bradley cleared his throat, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Sir, he began, addressing Quincy formally, Ms. Henderson alleges that you're on private property without authorization. Do you have any identification or documentation that proves you reside here? For a moment, Quincy's mind whirled. He'd never expected he'd have to show ID to enjoy his own pool. Nevertheless, he drew a slow breath and prepared to be reasonable. My wallet is inside the house, he said, glancing toward the sliding glass door that led to his kitchen. If you give me a minute to get out of the pool and grab it, I can show you my driver's license and proof of address. Beatrice, however, snorted in disbelief. Likely story, she retorted. You're probably just stalling. We've had enough of people sneaking in and pretending to live here. I say you should pack up and leave now. Hold on, Quincy interjected, bristling at her accusation. I'm not sneaking anywhere. I literally live here. This is my property, and I have every right to be in this pool. A tense silence settled, punctuated by the soft hum of the neighborhood's manicured lawns and the distant drone of a passing car. Officer Bradley exchanged a look with Beatrice, then turned back to Quincy, apparently trying to gauge the legitimacy of each side. In that charged moment, Quincy realized he needed more than calm words, he needed to defend his right to remain in his own backyard. Quincy Holt stood in the sparkling water of his private pool, scanning the small gathering on his patio. There was Beatrice Henderson, the assertive woman who had appeared out of nowhere, insisting he had no right to swim on his own property. By her side was her teenage son, Logan, who looked uneasily from his mother to Quincy, as though trying to figure out whether she was overreacting. And then there was Officer Bradley, uniform crisp and gaze level, requesting identification to confirm Quincy's residency in Riverbend Estates. Exhaling, Quincy decided compliance might smooth things out. All right, I'll show you proof, he said, his voice calm but edged with annoyance. Give me a second to get out of the pool, and I'll fetch my wallet from inside. He placed his hands on the pool ladder, intending to climb out, but Beatrice raised a hand with dramatic flair. I'm not letting you slip away, she declared, as though Quincy might sprint off and vanish the moment he was out of sight. Officer, don't let him go anywhere until we know exactly who he is. Quincy's eyebrows shot up. I'm literally stepping into my own house. Where else would I go? He gestured at his partially open sliding door. You can watch me through the door if you want. I just need a towel, some shoes, and my wallet. Logan stirred, appearing uncomfortable. Mom, he ventured, voice quiet, maybe we should let him. Logan, hush, Beatrice snapped, eyes never leaving Quincy. Then she turned to Officer Bradley. You see. He's already trying to wiggle out of this. I say we shouldn't allow it. The officer's expression grew conflicted. He cleared his throat. Ms. Henderson, let's be reasonable. If Mr. Holt needs to grab his ID, we can accompany him to ensure there's no misunderstanding. Quincy lifted his palms in a gesture of surrender. I have no objection to that. I just want to end this confusion. Reluctantly, Beatrice gave a curt nod. Fine. But I'm coming with you. Within moments, Quincy found himself walking across his patio, water dripping onto the concrete. The entire spectacle felt surreal, a homeowner needing to prove his residency to a suspicious neighbor and a supposedly neutral officer. Logan trailed behind them, shoulders hunched, seemingly dreading whatever scene might unfold next. They entered the house through the sliding door, stepping into a cozy living room furnished with a simple couch and a small coffee table. Quincy pointed to a neat row of unopened mail on the kitchen counter. Look, he said, picking up an envelope addressed to him, this has my name on it. Quincy Holt, 58, Sycamore Lane. That's this address. Officer Bradley took the envelope and studied it. Meanwhile, Beatrice's mouth tightened. Mail could be forged. Or stolen, she retorted, voice laced with accusation. I don't have the time or energy to forge mail, Quincy replied, exasperated. But here, he retrieved his wallet from the kitchen counter, pulling out his driver's license. This matches the address on the envelope. Officer Bradley examined the license, his stern demeanor softening a fraction. Looks legitimate, he acknowledged, returning it to Quincy. Ms. Henderson, it appears Mr. Holt does indeed live here. For a fleeting moment, Quincy felt a rush of relief. Maybe that would conclude the bizarre standoff. But Beatrice refused to relent. How do we know he didn't just move in this week, or rent it from someone else? Has he actually been approved by the neighborhood association? Quincy pinched the bridge of his nose. I purchased this house through a realtor, got the keys 2 months ago, and have been settling in ever since. If you want to check the property records, be my guest. But you can't just walk onto my backyard and demand I leave. Logan, who had remained silent, ventured a small statement. Mom, it looks like he's telling the truth. Maybe we should, be quiet. Beatrice's voice cracked with anger. She turned to Officer Bradley again. I want him off the premises. I think he's stalling for time. For all we know, he's a trespasser or a con artist. Quincy's temper, already fraying, snapped a little at that. You're the one trespassing, he said, pointing toward the backyard. I never invited you in. This is my home. If anyone should leave, it's you. His words triggered an outburst from Beatrice. She lunged forward, her voice rising in pitch. I will not be disrespected. This is Riverbend Estates, a place for respectable families, not schemers pretending to own properties they can't afford. Officer Bradley took a half step between them. Ma'am, calm down, he said, raising a hand in a bid for peace. Let's not turn this into a hostile confrontation. But it was too late. Beatrice's frustration reached a boiling point. Her face flushed with rage, she whirled toward Logan, demanding, help me get him out of here, force him to leave. A stunned silence fell. Even Officer Bradley seemed startled by her willingness to escalate into physical confrontation. Quincy braced himself, his heart pounding. He had no desire to get into an altercation in his living room, of all places, but the tension thickened with each passing second. Logan took a step forward, uncertainty writ large on his face. He clearly feared defying his mother's commands but also seemed unwilling to engage in violence against someone who had done nothing but defend his property. The entire situation teetered on the brink of chaos. Officer Bradley cleared his throat loudly, trying to regain control. Now, hold on, he said firmly, stepping in front of Beatrice. We're not resorting to force here, Ms. Henderson. The proper way to handle a dispute is through legal channels, not physical ones. Yet the look in Beatrice's eyes suggested she wasn't convinced. Quincy, mind racing, realized this dispute was far from resolved. He could only hope that reason, and the officer's presence, would prevent things from spiraling into an outright assault. Tension pulsed in Quincy Holt's living room as Beatrice Henderson clashed with Officer Bradley over how to handle what she still insisted was a case of trespassing. Despite the proof Quincy had shown, a driver's license, unopened mail, and a consistent story, Beatrice remained determined to cast him as a fraud. At her side, Logan hovered uneasily, torn between obeying his mother and recognizing Quincy might be telling the truth. Officer Bradley, seemingly the only one striving for civility, held up his hands. "Ms. Henderson, I understand your concerns, but from what I've seen, Mr. Holt has a valid claim to this property. Let's not escalate this further." But Beatrice wouldn't hear it. "He's lying," she spat, pointing accusingly at Quincy. "I don't trust any of this supposed evidence. People forge documents all the time. For all we know, he's waiting for backup from some criminal cohort." A flicker of frustration crossed Officer Bradley's face. "With all due respect, there's no sign of criminal activity here. He's shown multiple forms of ID and mail in his name. Unless you have concrete evidence contradicting that, we need to respect his rights as a homeowner." Quincy, who'd stayed quiet during their exchange, finally spoke up. "Enough of this. Ms. Henderson, you're in my house. You entered without my permission. If you don't leave willingly, I could consider pressing charges for trespassing." Those words set Beatrice off. She twisted toward Logan, face flushed with indignation, and barked, "You see how he threatens me? Are you just going to let him bully us, officer?" Before Bradley could respond, Beatrice took a step forward, bridging the distance between her and Quincy. From his vantage point, Quincy saw her eyes flicker with a determined, almost desperate energy. He could scarcely believe this was happening in his own home, a place he'd envisioned as a tranquil sanctuary. In one swift motion, Beatrice's hand shot out, gripping Quincy's arm as if to drag him away. Shocked, Quincy froze for a split second. Then he yanked his arm free, water still dripping from his swimsuit onto the hardwood floor. "Get off me," he exclaimed, voice taut with adrenaline. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Logan moved forward, clearly alarmed, but he hesitated. Officer Bradley, too, looked momentarily stunned, but he quickly stepped between them. "Ms. Henderson," he said sharply, "that's enough. You can't force someone out of their own home." Beatrice's breath came in rapid gasps, her anger seeming to overshadow reason. "He's the intruder," she insisted, jabbing a finger in Quincy's direction. "We have to remove him before I what?" Quincy interrupted, voice trembling with anger and disbelief. "Watch TV in my own living room. Cook dinner in my own kitchen. You're the one who should be leaving." For a heartbeat, silence clung to the walls like a heavy fog. Then, as if deciding the officer wasn't taking strong enough action, Beatrice whirled on Logan. "You heard me, help me get him out. Now." Logan's eyes went wide. His gaze flicked from Quincy to the officer and back to his mother. Torn by conflicting loyalties, he reached a trembling hand toward Quincy's shoulder, but it was clear he had no conviction in the act. The scene bore an air of tragic absurdity, like a forced drama that none of them truly wanted. Officer Bradley finally regained his composure. He stepped forward and gently but firmly pushed Logan's arm down. "This is not how we handle disputes," he barked. "Ms. Henderson, you've crossed a line here. Assaulting someone in their own residence is a serious offense." Undeterred, Beatrice glared at the officer. "So you're taking his side?" she demanded, voice trembling with rage. "I knew you wouldn't protect law-abiding citizens. You're probably in cahoots with him. Maybe you're part of the same ring, forging documents so freeloaders can sneak in." Quincy watched Officer Bradley's jaw tighten. The tension in the room coiled tighter, like a spring ready to snap. For a terrifying moment, Quincy wondered if Beatrice might truly attack him or if the officer might consider forcibly removing her, culminating in an all-out brawl in what was supposed to be a peaceful home. "Ms. Henderson," Officer Bradley said again, this time with steely resolve, "I am asking you to step outside. If Mr. Holt wishes to press charges for trespassing or assault, that is his right. At the mention of potential legal consequences, Logan's eyes darted to his mother's face. "Mom, come on," he whispered urgently. "Let's just leave. This is getting out of hand." Beatrice's lips parted, and for a split second, Quincy thought she'd relent. Instead, she gave a final scornful toss of her hair. "Fine. But don't think this is over. I'm going to find out exactly who you are, Quincy Holt, and why you're pretending to belong in Riverbend Estates. The truth will come out." She wheeled around, striding toward the front door with Logan trailing in her wake. Officer Bradley paused, glancing apologetically at Quincy. "I'll walk them outside," he murmured, his earlier neutrality tinged with regret. "After that, we can talk about filing a report if you choose." Nodding mutely, Quincy followed at a distance. The trio exited onto the porch, sunshine illuminating the tension etched into each of their faces. Quincy watched as the officer guided Beatrice and Logan down the walkway, away from the home. Only once they reached the gate did the atmosphere lighten, the sense of impending chaos lessening. Standing at his threshold, Quincy felt his anger and fear replaced by a profound weariness. He had never asked for a confrontation or an officer's intervention. All he'd wanted was a peaceful swim. Now, instead of feeling relief to see them leave, he was left grappling with the unsettling realization that Beatrice's threats might not be empty. For the first time since moving in, Quincy no longer felt entirely safe in his own home. For the first time in months, Quincy Holt dreaded walking outside into his own backyard. The confrontation with Beatrice Henderson had left him shaken, and the memory of her trying to yank him from the pool still played in his mind. Despite Officer Bradley escorting her away, Quincy couldn't shake the fear that she might return, more determined than before. He woke early the following day, steeling himself with a cup of strong coffee. Through the kitchen window, he watched the sun's rays warm the pool water, tempting him for a morning dip. Yet, an uneasy feeling gnawed at him. His property might be legally his, but Beatrice's hostility made him feel like an outsider in Riverbend Estates. Nevertheless, Quincy refused to be driven away from his own home. Clad in a simple t-shirt and swim trunks, he braved the short walk across the patio, determined to reclaim a shred of normalcy. With a soft sigh, he eased into the pool, letting the cool water envelop him. For a brief moment, peace returned. That reprieve ended abruptly when he heard voices beyond the fence. His heart sank as he recognized the sharp timbre of Beatrice's voice. He couldn't make out her words precisely, but he sensed agitation. Moments later, she appeared at the gate, flanked by Logan, who looked profoundly uncomfortable, and none other than Officer Bradley again, looking as though he'd rather be anywhere else. Quincy's stomach twisted. He swam to the edge of the pool, not wanting to appear as though he were hiding. "Back again," he called, voice echoing over the water. "I thought we resolved this." Beatrice gripped the gate. "Hardly," she snapped. "I've been in touch with the Homeowners Association, and they insist no one named Quincy Holt was approved to live here." She shot a triumphant glance at the officer. "I told you he was a fraud." Officer Bradley, looking weary, raised a hand. "Ms. Henderson, that's not exactly accurate," he said. "I spoke with the association's records manager. They confirmed Mr. Holt's name is on the deed, but they also mentioned a pending administrative form for new residents that hasn't been filed." Quincy frowned. "That form is for registering for neighborhood amenities, right? The letter said it was optional. I haven't gotten around to it." He took a breath, exasperated. "It doesn't negate that I own this place." Beatrice's smirk faltered, but her resolve didn't. "Regardless, the association wants clarity on who's using the community facilities. That includes the pool." "That's my private pool," Quincy countered, drumming his fingers on the edge of the deck. "It's not one of the community pools. You can't keep calling it a facility like it's yours to police." Logan avoided Quincy's gaze, clearly hating this. Officer Bradley cleared his throat. Ms. Henderson, the deed specifically states the pool belongs to Mr. Holt's property, not the community. There's no rule requiring him to share or vacate it. And the incomplete forms don't change that basic fact. Beatrice's eyes blazed. He's still stalling, she insisted. For all we know, he snuck into someone else's purchase contract and put his name on it. Or he forged the paperwork. You heard the association has no record of him completing all steps to join the neighborhood. Quincy's frustration reached a boiling point. Fill out the forms, join the association, it's all bureaucratic red tape. I've shown you enough proof to establish I belong here. Apparently convinced her words were falling on deaf ears, Beatrice turned to Officer Bradley. Then do something, she demanded, voice shrill. Remove him. He's clearly not following the guidelines. Logan flinched at her harsh tone. Mom, enough, he mumbled, face reddening with embarrassment. We shouldn't, but Beatrice silenced him with a glare. Without warning, she pushed the gate open and stepped onto Quincy's property, her posture as rigid as a statue. Quincy stiffened, hands gripping the pool ladder. Do not come any closer, he warned, heart thudding. You're trespassing on private property. Ignoring him, Beatrice made her way to the water's edge. If the officer won't do his job, she declared, then I will. Logan, help me. Let's get this squatter out of here once and for all. Quincy's eyes flickered with disbelief. He glanced at Officer Bradley, hoping he'd intervene. The officer did lift a hand, as if to stop her, but Beatrice shoved past him, single-minded in her purpose. Fear and anger collided in Quincy's chest as she planted a foot at the pool's rim, reaching toward him with determined fury. Logan hovered behind her, torn. He half raised an arm as though to follow her instruction, but something in his expression suggested regret. Quincy braced himself, adrenaline surging. He had no desire to engage physically, but he also refused to be manhandled out of his own pool. Stop! Officer Bradley's voice cut through the tension, finally snapping into a tone of command. He reached for Beatrice's arm, trying to pull her back. Ms. Henderson, you can't do this. It's assault. She whipped around, eyes wild. You're an officer, yet you won't defend our neighborhood from imposters. Fine, I'll do it myself. Her gaze locked onto Quincy once more, as though she planned to drag him out by force. Quincy's pulse hammered. The situation had devolved beyond rational debate. Stay away from me, he growled, gripping the pool's edge defensively. Beatrice lunged forward, and for an instant, Quincy feared the worst, until Officer Bradley forcibly stepped between them, forcibly halting her attempt. Water splashed onto the deck, a harsh sound echoing their heightened emotions. Logan flinched, stepping back, while Beatrice raged, her momentum broken only by the officer's firm hold. I said enough, Officer Bradley declared, voice echoing with finality. Ms. Henderson, stand down, or I'll have no choice but to take further action. That moment froze in Quincy's mind, his private pool turned battlefield, the unwavering rage on Beatrice's face, and the officer's last-ditch effort to prevent an outright brawl. Quincy's only solace was that Bradley had intervened. But the question burning in his thoughts was simple: how long before she came back again, more emboldened and unhinged than ever? The altercation by Quincy Holt's pool had finally de-escalated when Officer Bradley managed to pull Beatrice Henderson away, preventing her from physically yanking Quincy out of the water. But rather than leaving, Beatrice continued to hover at the pool's edge, face tight with anger. Her son, Logan, stood a short distance behind her, wringing his hands. Tension clung to the humid air. Quincy, chest still heaving from the surge of adrenaline, decided to break the silence. This has gone far enough, he said, moving carefully toward the shallow end. I've shown my documents, I've explained myself. You have no right to put your hands on me. Beatrice's nostrils flared. You're a trespasser in Riverbend Estates, she repeated, voice loaded with conviction. Officer Bradley should be arresting you, not coddling you. The officer exchanged a glance with Quincy before clearing his throat. "Ms. Henderson, I can't arrest someone who's produced legitimate proof of ownership. If you suspect fraud, you should file a formal complaint through legal channels. But there's no sign he's violating the law." That statement, meant to quell her demands, only seemed to inflame Beatrice further. "You're worthless," she snapped. "Maybe I should call a real officer who'll do the job right." A flicker of something, annoyance, maybe worry, crossed Officer Bradley's features. Quincy couldn't help noticing how reluctant he'd been to provide specific details about his precinct, or even his badge number, during earlier interactions. The officer wore a uniform, sure, but the way Beatrice talked to him, almost as if he were a personal resource, raised an uneasy suspicion. Quincy wiped the water from his face, a slow dread creeping in. "Officer," he began, "I don't think we ever established which department you work for. Are you local to Riverbend Estates? The city police? The county sheriff's office?" Officer Bradley hesitated just a second too long. "I'm, contracted for community oversight in certain private neighborhoods," he muttered, voice subdued. Beatrice interjected, "He's an authorized enforcer," as though reading from a script, assigned to handle security issues in upmarket areas like ours. But the seeds of doubt had already been planted in Quincy's mind. Municipal officers usually identified their department, carried clear ID, and had backup if needed. This man had arrived solely at Beatrice's behest, apparently answering to her commands. "What's your badge number?" Quincy pressed gently. "I'd like to verify your credentials, especially after all this chaos." Officer Bradley offered a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "My credentials are in order, trust me. Let's focus on defusing the situation instead of sowing distrust." Beatrice scowled, turning on Quincy. "He's legitimate, stop playing detective. You don't get to question someone who's trying to protect our community." "Protecting the community from me? The lawful owner of this house?" Quincy retorted. "What if I want to confirm that the officer telling me to leave my property is actually recognized by the local authorities?" Logan, who had mostly stayed silent, finally spoke up. "Mom, maybe we should just," he trailed off under her glare, shifting his weight uncomfortably. Sensing the standoff intensify, Officer Bradley lifted a hand. "Look, Mr. Holt, let me see your IDs again. We'll settle this once and for all, okay?" Quincy stiffened, recalling how he'd already presented everything. "I told you, I have a driver's license and mail with my name and address. Do you want me to bring out the property deed while I'm at it?" Before Bradley could answer, Beatrice threw up her arms in exasperation. "He's stalling again. Officer, I've had enough. Remove him or I'll contact someone with real authority." A cold sensation trickled down Quincy's spine. Something about this entire dynamic felt staged, as if Beatrice had orchestrated an elaborate attempt to intimidate him. The question was why? What did she stand to gain by forcing him out? He cast a suspicious glance at Officer Bradley, who, despite wearing a uniform, had provided few concrete details about his job or identity. "I'll show you whatever you need," Quincy said slowly, eyes flicking between them. "But while we're at it, I'd like to know your full name and official badge number, officer." Bradley's face reddened. "I don't see why that's necessary," he responded tersely. "Let's handle the ID check first." "Fine," Quincy agreed, heading toward the back door. Water dripped from his swim trunks as he re-entered the house. "Wait here," he added, ignoring Beatrice's indignant sniff. He'd leave the glass door open just enough to keep them in sight while rummaging for the deed. In the kitchen, Quincy opened his file cabinet, extracting the property deed and a letter from the mortgage lender. As he gathered them, a sense of unease deepened. The more he reflected on how Bradley took orders from Beatrice, the more suspect the officer's credentials seemed. Determined to find clarity, Quincy grabbed his cell phone, intending to verify local law enforcement agencies. If Bradley was truly an officer, there should be a quick way to confirm. Stepping back onto the patio, Quincy presented the documents. Here. This is the deed, stamped by the county. My name, date of purchase, everything. Officer Bradley took a cursory glance, but he looked less concerned with the paperwork than with Beatrice's reaction. She snatched it from his hands, scanning it with hawkish intensity. I see a lot of fancy stamps, she said at last, but I'm still not convinced. I want official proof from the Homeowners Association. Quincy's frustration flared. Then contact them. In the meantime, get off my property, or I'll have to call the actual police. A tense silence fell. Then Beatrice turned a furious gaze on Bradley. I asked you to handle this, she spat out, nearly revealing something that caught Quincy's attention. She corrected herself swiftly. You're supposed to protect honest residents, not baby some intruder. Quincy's eyes narrowed. Paid him, did you say? She glared at him, refusing to respond. Officer Bradley cleared his throat, looking cornered. Let's, remain calm, he said, flustered. Ms. Henderson, maybe we should step away. This matter can go through the proper channels. His words only fueled Quincy's suspicion that the badge might be nothing more than a prop. If Bradley truly had authority, he wouldn't be floundering under Beatrice's demands. As the tension mounted, Quincy resolved to get to the bottom of it. Something told him that confronting this questionable officer might be the key to ending Beatrice's brazen attempts to evict him. Standing barefoot on the patio, Quincy Holt felt his patience reach a critical low. Beatrice Henderson hovered nearby, her tense posture telegraphing a readiness to pounce. Officer Bradley, meanwhile, clutched Quincy's deed and identification, seemingly trying to mediate but exuding the demeanor of someone in over his head. Logan, arms crossed and eyes downcast, was clearly discomfited by the entire episode. Quincy's gaze darted from the official-looking badge on Bradley's uniform to Beatrice's defiant expression. Ms. Henderson, he said slowly, I'm giving you one last chance to leave my property peacefully. I've shown you proof I live here. I have no interest in further conflict. Beatrice spat out a laugh laced with anger. My chance. How dare you act like you're in charge? Officer Bradley, do your job already. The so-called officer shifted his weight. Look, he began, we have to maintain order. If there's still doubt about Mr. Holt's ownership, you can follow up with the homeowners board or the county clerk's office. But right now, I can't forcibly remove him without probable cause. Beatrice's nostrils flared. Then you're worthless to me, she snapped. I'll call for real backup if you won't do it. A prickling sense of alarm coursed through Quincy. The conversation's undertone suggested that Beatrice had some private arrangement with Bradley, maybe a payment, or at least a personal favor. Why else would she so confidently order him around? Determined to get clarity, Quincy decided to push the issue of Bradley's credentials. He stepped forward, ignoring the drizzle of leftover pool water trickling down his calf. Officer Bradley, he said firmly, I want to see your badge up close. Please show it to me and provide your full name. I'm going to verify you're an actual officer with the local authorities. Bradley's eyes flicked between Quincy and Beatrice. My credentials are valid, he mumbled, though his tone lacked conviction. I'm just, not from the nearest precinct. I handle broader community tasks. Quincy arched an eyebrow. That's vague. So, you're not with the local city police or the county sheriff's department? Beatrice cut in, her voice cracking, he's a private security officer with certain policing privileges. Now stop your interrogation. Yet the unease in her expression hinted at deeper fears, perhaps that the ruse was unraveling. Quincy pressed on. Private security typically has identification from the firm they represent, not a standard police badge. Let me see it. Logan, biting his lip, muttered softly, Mom, this is getting weird. Maybe we should just, hush. Beatrice barked, snapping her attention to Logan. We have to see this through. I won't let some squatters fool us. Quincy exhaled, forcibly calming himself. "All right," he said quietly, "I'm done entertaining this charade. I'm going to call the actual police, city or county, and ask them to verify your status, Officer Bradley. If you're legitimate, I'll apologize for the inconvenience. If you're not," Beatrice's eyes went wide at that, and the color drained from her face. "You can't just summon more cops," she insisted, voice rising. "We already have an officer here. Don't you trust him?" "That's precisely the point," Quincy countered, reaching for his cell phone on the patio table. "I'm not convinced he's who he says he is. And given how you're ordering him around, I suspect something's off." Bradley's features hardened. "Put the phone down," he said, a slight tremor in his voice. "There's no need to complicate this further." But Quincy was already dialing. He turned away, stepping a few paces to the side for a clearer signal. 911, he recited under his breath, pressing call. The line rang once, twice, and then a calm dispatcher's voice filled his ear. "Hello, emergency services," the voice said. "What's your situation?" Glancing over his shoulder, Quincy locked eyes with Beatrice, who looked panicked. "I'm at 58, Sycamore Lane in Riverbend Estates," he told the dispatcher. "A man here claims to be Officer Bradley, but I can't confirm his credentials. There's a dispute involving a neighbor trying to remove me from my own home. I need official police assistance." Beatrice let out a strangled sound, and Bradley shifted into a defensive stance. "Sir," the dispatcher responded, "we'll send a patrol unit to verify. Remain calm and don't engage physically unless you're in danger." "Understood," Quincy replied, ending the call. Heart thudding, he faced the two intruders. "Real officers are on their way," he announced. "If you're legit, Officer Bradley, you have nothing to worry about." Beatrice's composure cracked further. You've made a mistake," she stammered, tossing a desperate look at Bradley. "This could ruin everything." Bradley inhaled sharply, stepping away from her. "Ma'am, this has gone too far," he muttered, as though regretting whatever arrangement they had. "I didn't sign up for a standoff with actual law enforcement." Quincy's suspicions crystallized. They had an arrangement, indeed, some scheme to intimidate him into leaving, perhaps so Beatrice could claim the property or force a resale. He couldn't be certain of her end goal, but it was clear Bradley wasn't a cop with legitimate authority. Logan, trembling, watched the exchange with growing distress. "Mom," he ventured, voice wavering, "why are we doing this? Mr. Holt hasn't hurt anyone. We're doing what's necessary." Beatrice hissed, though her conviction seemed brittle as glass. She glanced toward the exit, apparently debating whether to flee before the real officers arrived. The hush that fell over the scene was eerie, punctuated only by the distant hum of a lawnmower somewhere in the neighborhood. Quincy stood, phone in hand, bracing himself for whatever might unfold next. If the police arrived soon, it could either resolve the fiasco or spark an even greater confrontation. Given the tension lighting Beatrice's eyes, Quincy suspected it would be anything but simple. Each passing minute felt like an hour as Quincy Holt, Beatrice Henderson, Officer Bradley, and Logan stood under the harsh midday sun in Quincy's backyard. A hush hung over the group, interrupted only by the soft trickle of pool water and the occasional distant bark of a dog. Quincy's pulse throbbed with anticipation. He'd called 911, reporting the dubious officer presence. Now it was a matter of waiting to see who would show up, and how this standoff would end. Beatrice was the picture of nervous energy, pacing in a small circle. She glanced repeatedly at the yard's gate, as though hoping to slip away. Her earlier bravado faltered with each moment that passed. Officer Bradley stood off to one side, shoulders stiff, dread etched into his features. Logan looked downright miserable, hands shoved deep in his pockets, occasionally shooting Quincy apologetic glances. Finally, the unmistakable wail of sirens drifted over the manicured lawns of Riverbend Estates. A hush fell once more as a marked police cruiser pulled up in front of Quincy's house. Moments later, two uniformed officers stepped into view. Their crisp, official gear contrasted sharply with Bradley's somewhat generic uniform. Quincy felt a wave of relief. At last, proper authorities. He moved to open the gate for them, though he remained cautious, uncertain of how Beatrice might react. She stood frozen, shoulders rigid with tension, while Bradley avoided eye contact. "Hello," Quincy greeted the newcomers, keeping his voice steady. "I'm Quincy Holt. I called 911. One of the officers, a tall woman with a name badge reading R. Wheeler, nodded curtly. "We received your report, sir. You indicated there was a dispute with an individual claiming to be law enforcement." Quincy gestured at Officer Bradley. "Yes, ma'am. That man is wearing a badge and uniform but hasn't provided legitimate credentials. He's been following Ms. Henderson's orders to try and remove me from my own property." Wheeler exchanged a look with her partner, Officer Navarro, who stepped forward. "Sir," Navarro addressed Bradley, voice firm. "Can we see your identification? Which department are you from?" Bradley swallowed hard, eyes flicking to Beatrice as if seeking permission. She maintained a stony silence, face taut. At length, he produced a small card from his pocket, but neither Wheeler nor Navarro seemed impressed. Navarro scanned it, frowned, and shared a quick glance with Wheeler. "This card doesn't look official," Wheeler said, turning it over in her hand. "Where exactly do you serve, Mr. Bradley?" Flushing, Bradley stammered, I'm a private security officer. But Ms. Henderson told me I'd have the authority to enforce local ordinances within Riverbend Estates. She hired me for private enforcement duties." Wheeler's brow creased. "Private security doesn't have policing powers. You can't detain or remove someone from a property if they lawfully own it." At that, Beatrice erupted, her voice taking on a desperate edge. "He's obviously not the real homeowner. I told you, there's no record of him completing the association forms. He's an intruder, forging documents." Navarro approached her calmly. "Ma'am, we'll look into your concerns. But from our initial understanding, Mr. Holt has a valid deed. If that's so, he's not trespassing. Meanwhile, your attempts to remove him could be grounds for harassment, or worse." Quincy nearly sighed in relief, though he kept his guard up. "Officers, I can show you any documentation you need. I have the deed, ID, even video of Ms. Henderson forcing her way into my yard." Wheeler motioned for him to slow down. "That would be appreciated, Mr. Holt. But first, let's sort out this officer impersonation matter. Are you certain, Mr. Bradley, that you never presented yourself as a sworn police officer?" Bradley's gaze dropped to the patio. "I told her I had security training and that I could handle neighborhood issues. She insisted on calling me officer in front of people. I didn't exactly correct her." Navarro's jaw tensed. "That's borderline false representation, especially if you displayed a police-style badge. Did you do so?" Bradley shifted uncomfortably, nodding once. "It's a replica. I use it when responding to private calls." He cast a nervous glance at Beatrice. "She paid me well to come handle this situation, said she wanted a uniformed presence to scare off a trespasser." Logan let out a soft groan, burying his face in his hands. "Mom, why?" he mumbled, voice thick with embarrassment. "We could have just talked to him like normal neighbors." Beatrice turned on her son, face contorted. "He had no right to be here. I was protecting our community from freeloaders." Her voice rose to a near shriek. "Everyone in Riverbend Estates pays a premium for exclusivity, and I won't stand by while some random person occupies a house he doesn't deserve." Wheeler exchanged a grim nod with Navarro, clearly grasping the bigger picture. "Ms. Henderson," she said, voice icy calm, "you may be facing charges for conspiracy and harassment, depending on what we uncover. Hiring someone to impersonate an officer to intimidate a lawful resident is a serious matter." A look of shock settled on Beatrice's face. Her bluster evaporated, replaced by frantic blinking. Conspiracy. But, he said, she gestured wildly at Bradley, who only lowered his head in abject defeat. Everyone, let's move inside, Navarro instructed, turning to Quincy. Could we interview you privately and see the documents you mentioned? Still rattled, Quincy nodded. Of course. I'll show you everything. Wheeler glanced at Logan, who stood near tears. Son, you might want to wait outside, she advised gently. We'll talk to you in a moment. As Logan retreated, a heavy sense of relief mingled with sorrow spread through Quincy. Yes, it seemed the tide had turned in his favor, but the ordeal had left him shaken. The real police were now involved, and from the looks on their faces, Beatrice Henderson and her hired officer were in serious trouble. Even so, Quincy couldn't help but wonder how far she'd have gone if he hadn't called 911, and whether he'd ever feel truly at peace in the place he called home. With genuine law enforcement now on the scene, Quincy Holt experienced a surge of relief tempered by lingering apprehension. He led Officers Wheeler and Navarro into his living room, carefully spreading out his property deed and proof of residency on the coffee table. The crisp document stood as a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded just hours earlier in his backyard. Meanwhile, Beatrice Henderson hovered by the door, arms folded, anxiety etched into her every frown line. Her son, Logan, stood off to the side, gaze glued to the floor. And in a corner, the so-called Officer Bradley, revealed as Russell Payne, clung to whatever remained of his composure, his uniform suddenly looking more like a costume than an emblem of authority. As Wheeler flipped through the papers, she gave Quincy an approving nod. All of this appears valid, she said. It matches county records, and the association's main office confirmed the house belongs to you. Navarro, meanwhile, confronted Russell Payne directly. We've spoken to our dispatch and confirmed you are not a sworn officer. Displaying a badge and uniform under false pretenses is a serious offense. He gestured at the patch on Payne's sleeve. Where exactly did you get this uniform? Payne swallowed hard, voice shaky. I run a small private security firm. Ms. Henderson hired me, said there was a trespasser in her community who refused to leave. That was a lie, Navarro stated bluntly. You should have verified the claim rather than stepping in with a theatrical display of authority. All eyes turned to Beatrice, her earlier bravado evaporating under the weight of evidence. Wheeler approached her, mouth set in a grim line. Ms. Henderson, you arranged this entire charade to intimidate Mr. Holt, correct? Beatrice sputtered, color draining from her cheeks. I only wanted to keep the neighborhood exclusive, she finally admitted. I thought if someone wasn't approved, they had to go. You never meant to what? Quincy cut in, voice level. Physically drag me out of my own pool. Cause me to fear for my safety in my own house. Logan winced, glancing at Quincy with clear regret. Mom got carried away. I'm sorry, he mumbled. Navarro exchanged a glance with Wheeler, then turned to Quincy. It's within your rights to press charges, he informed, handing back the deed. Conspiracy to harass, filing a false report, there are multiple angles here. Beatrice's features crumpled. She opened her mouth, but no words emerged. It was clear she hadn't foreseen this reckoning, nor the legal jeopardy she now faced. Quincy looked between the officers, Russell Payne, and the deflated Beatrice. Though anger still simmered, a part of him felt relief that the truth had come out. I'd like to file a complaint, he said firmly. For harassment and for impersonation of law enforcement. Wheeler nodded. We'll make a full report. Mr. Holt, we appreciate your cooperation, and we're glad we arrived before things escalated further. Outside, the sun dipped lower in the sky, but the resolution had finally dawned. Beatrice's scheme had been exposed, and for Quincy, a sense of justice began to settle over the home he had nearly been forced to abandon. In the days following the police intervention, Quincy Holt found himself inundated with support and curiosity from neighbors throughout Riverbend Estates. News of Beatrice Henderson's arrest and Russell Payne's impersonation charges spread quickly, becoming the talk of local social circles and online neighborhood forums. Once the initial shock wore off, many residents approached Quincy with apologies and offers of assistance, asserting that Beatrice's actions did not represent the community as a whole. Meanwhile, Beatrice's once proud standing in Riverbend Estates disintegrated. Facing legal repercussions for conspiracy and harassment, she placed her house on the market, presumably to cover mounting legal fees. Logan, caught in the crossfire of his mother's ill-fated scheme, transferred to live with a relative in another county, a decision rumored to stem from the embarrassment and tension the ordeal had caused. For Quincy, life returned to a tentative normal. Each morning, he sipped coffee by the pool, reclaiming the sense of peace he had once cherished. The memory of Beatrice barging into his backyard lingered, a reminder of how quickly illusions of safety could be shattered by someone else's unfounded entitlement. Yet, gratitude also filled him as he recalled the real officers, Wheeler and Navarro, who had acted decisively to protect his rights. Encouraged by several neighbors, Quincy opted to install a comprehensive security system. Cameras now dotted the corners of his property, capturing every angle of the pool, gates, and entrances. Although it pained him to feel the need for such measures, the reassurance it provided was too valuable to ignore. Local media briefly latched onto the story, framing it as an example of how prejudice and personal vendettas could escalate into criminal schemes. Quincy, typically private, agreed to a short interview, hoping his experience might caution others in gated communities against hasty judgments and vigilante policing. In the interview, Quincy emphasized the importance of verifying facts before making accusations. "I hope this encourages neighbors everywhere to approach each other with respect," he told the reporter. A simple conversation could have clarified everything. Instead, someone tried to fabricate evidence, hire a fake officer, and force me out of my own home. With time, the neighborhood gossip died down. People moved on, focusing on the next community event or family milestone. Even so, Quincy's presence at Riverbend Estates remained forever altered. Where he once anticipated a quiet life, he found himself inadvertently cast as a symbol of resilience, a reminder that not everyone who wields authority, real or imagined, can trample another's rights. Ultimately, Quincy settled back into his routine, determined not to let Beatrice's conspiracy taint his love for his home. The pool water glistened, the oak trees whispered in the breeze, and though a security camera lens now watched from above, Quincy felt a greater sense of ownership than ever before. He had fought for his place under the sun and, in doing so, reclaimed the sanctuary he had sought all along. Hey everyone! If you found this story powerful and meaningful, please show your support by hitting the like button, subscribing to the channel, ringing the bell to never miss our thought-provoking content. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that inspire, educate, and challenge perspectives. Thank you for being part of this journey.